steadily it rises. Public preference for Lincoln Continental as the symbol for today's luxury motoring.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict. I'm going to try something a little bit different here, and I'm going to have the picture-in-picture to kind of show you guys where my mind's at as I'm talking about this car. So if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you've come back before, thank you so much. I definitely appreciate the continued support. If you've had an opportunity to listen to Lincoln Addict podcast, you know that I had Larry Highbloom on. And if you go to lincolnaddict.podbean.com or just Google Lincoln Addict podcast, it'll land you here. And you can either click these different links to listen, on your device, or you can actually scroll and listen right here. Typically, I think the most downloads or streams I get are from Apple Podcasts. So if you've got an Apple device, just go into that pre-installed purple icon and search Lincoln Addict, and it'll pull you up. You can hit follow there. But I recently had Larry on, and I want to thank Larry for taking the time to sit down with us. He talked about the ownership of this car, which is, I think, going on 30, 40 years. And his ownership is ending now in May of 2023. You could see on 5/23/23 here on the screen. This car sold. My understanding was the reserve was around 145,000. So this car, it was super exciting to watch, and I had really wanted to go live during the ending of it. However, I had an errand I had to run, and what that ended up meaning was I went live on Instagram about an hour, maybe about 45 minutes before the auction ended. I was live for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I talked about uh, the car had jumped up, and if anybody had the funds to be able to purchase this car, oftentimes people are looking for a nice car, and they you know th- they want the nicest they can get, and this is definitely one of those cars. But bottom line is this 62 Lincoln Continental Convertible, it did sell. And um, when something I wanted to point out, in the past, you'll see like here where it says no reserve on these cars, and there's time remaining. That's the indicator that there's not a reserve. And in this case, this car, of course, did not have this yellowish icon because there was a reserve. Now, I don't know. My son had asked me, because we were watching this together. He had asked, "Hey, Dad, did the people know that they haven't met the reserve as they're bidding?" And someone would have to chime in if you bid on this car or another car. I'd be curious to see what your experience was. But if we scroll down here, really what I want to hone in on is to show you how this car bumped up from the earlier activity that day. There's a lot of comments. This again was definitely one that was exciting to watch. So basically, on May 23rd, which was yesterday at about noon, the bid jumped to 76,000. It had been at 75. So you could see here on the 20th, or excuse me, the 21st, it was at 63,000. So it was hovering around that mid 60 to mid 70,000, which my understanding was pretty far from the reserve. What happened yesterday about 12:30, just after noon Eastern time, it started bumping up, and you had it going up only by $500 increments. It bumps up, $6,000 or so, and then it really kind of starts jumping to 91, 95, and so on. You can kind of see here the chain of events on what happened. It gets up to about 110, and this was probably, I think the time that I went live was around the 105, 110. So I was excited that it had just went through, to six figures, over 100,000. So I was kind of excited to see where it was going to end up. C2 School comes in at 111, and you can see here it does start jumping up. It's exciting when it's not just going, 500 and things like that, because you know that these people are serious about buying it when they're bidding it up, 1,000, to $5,000. So around the time it was supposed to end, I think was about 6:30 or just before that Eastern time, you start to see here again $2,000, 4,000, 3,000, and it really starts bumping up. Now, you start to see some comments like this: "Are you trolling the king?" Um, and people are chiming in here. Now, at about 625, it gets to 136,000, and I was wondering if it was going to just level off at that point. Now, where I had went to eat last night, they don't have the best internet connection for whatever reason in this place. I always have internet challenges. So when it got to about 138 to 140, my device wasn't refreshing, unfortunately. So I was texting a couple of people, and they were saying no, it just hit 138, it just hit 140, so on and so forth. And what happened is at 629 into 630, it basically went from 100, it went right around to the 145 mark. So it went from 140, let's call it 142, and it went to 145. So that, my understanding, was what it kind of pushed over the edge, and it sold. So I was able to get confirmation, in fact, that it did sell. And this person, C2 School, says at RBD with the numbers, that is 2 slabs in 2 months. Nice collection. This one is as good as they come. So there were a few people that were bidding on these cars. And I think if we click on this, it will show you the auction win. So there you go. So this individual purchased the 63 for 70 grand, which was 1 month ago yesterday. And then a month later, he comes in at 145 grand. So spent over a little over 200,000 the last month or so on buying Lincolns. Now, I did post this right away since I had Larry on the podcast. I posted and said 523.23 car sells 145,000. I do think this is a good thing for Lincoln owners. I know some buyers get discouraged because you go, wow, possibly it's a lot of money. I don't know that I could ever, maybe splurge for a car this expensive. What I would tell you is, again, what we reinforced on Lincoln Addict podcast with Larry on this episode. This car really has a ton of money put into it, and it really is on a different level than a typical Lincoln that you're going to see for sale. And I want to just highlight this, which I did yesterday when I went live. And if we look at one of these documents, I always have a hard time finding it right here. If we look at this, and try to keep this up, the total hours that Larry reinforced, 1,550 hours. Now, if you go to your local body shop or restoration shop and you just ask them what's your labor per hour in 2023, you might be surprised. I mean, different places of the country, obviously, different economic situations and things like that. But you'll see people easily charge 125 an hour. Some of the high-end builders might be more, might be a little less. It just really depends on where you live. But when they started this restoration back, you could see the date here. Order date was October 30th, 2013. That was about 10 years ago. And, again, 2013, different situation. They were at $86 an hour. So you could see 1,550 hours. That was $133,000. Now, again, you might find today that it's 125 an hour or something to that effect. But he spent 41, almost 42 grand on parts. I know oftentimes people could say, well, how could parts get to that level? Was this even a nice car? Certainly they can. These parts, as Larry reinforced, one of the motivating factors for him doing the restoration was the fact that these parts are becoming harder to find. And, if Larry had said, sure, give me every NOS part, which stands for new old stock, that you have, then, you could easily start jumping up. This probably includes rechroming of parts as well, taking the dents and dings out of any of the stainless trim, so on and so forth. Everything that falls into that parts category. He had 42 grand there. You have tax, of course. The total bill was 186,000. And as Larry had mentioned, because it took a 4-year period, what ended up happening was Baker said, look, we're going to give you a break on the labor side of it, and that's what brought the cost at 133,660. You got to keep in mind we don't know what Larry paid for this car back in 1990, but let's just say it was 10 or 15 grand. It might have been less, it might have been a little more, but back in those days, these cars weren't as maybe sought after. But let's just call it, for sake of it, 10 grand. You add in the 133, that gets you to 143, and then of course all of the maintenance. He talked about having the engine rebuilt well before the restoration. You start adding all that in, and he basically was able to liquidate the car for about what he had in it, more than likely, right? He, may have had a little bit more in it. These are just kind of, loose numbers, if you will, that I'm kicking around. But the reason why I say this is you have to be conscious of the fact that you don't always get maybe what you have into a car, especially if it's a custom car, but you also don't always get everything that you've put into a car. And we all know that. Some cars are more sought after than others and things like that. But I would I would encourage you to go back to Larry's feedback on the episode if you listen to it. Larry talked about if you have a car that you want to restore, you have to come up with your game plan on how far do you want to take it. This was taken to a 100-point restoration where he could go to a Lincoln meet and all of his colleagues and the folks in the LCOC are going to look at it and say, dude, tip of the cap, this car is amazing, you got 100 points. That's kind of a different level than the average guy or lady is going to be willing to go through. But it's worth noting that because, again, if he has 150 into it, it's not like he walked away and made 50 grand, if you will. So again, I think it was a very strong number. um, I was skeptical if it was going to hit this number, but I think it's great because it shows someone that has the time and money in it that these cars can and will go for a solid dollar. uh, I think my last point is on the next episode of the podcast. There's going to be a couple of people that are going to join us. It's going to be a real cool episode, and it's going to tie into someone I met in California a few years ago, and something that one of the people that joins the episode, he talks a little bit about building cars that go to Barrett Jackson, and being competitive and wanting to sell for more and more and more. But you have to look at the market and see what are people paying for. You could see here 150 grand for a stock Lincoln that's not tied to the Kennedys is a very strong number. I have to look back. It might be one of the highest sales for a non-resto mod, non-custom, non JFK or Kennedy family car, right? Because we know some of those cars tied to the Kennedys have went for hundreds of thousands of dollars because of that connection. But if you think about a stock Lincoln with no wheels, no air suspension, no resto mod, this is a very, very strong number. So it's good for all Lincoln owners, I think. But the one caveat that I would say is don't let this discourage you. It's not like you're not going to be able to find a car. If you My last comment that I'll make is, again, if we go back here to bring a trailer, you could type in Lincoln Continental and look right here on 511, not even a month ago, 54,000, right? This beautiful 66 that I really liked, 52,000. A white or a sunburst yellow 61 Lincoln Continental Convertible, 55.5. So these cars are attainable. I mean, sure, that's a lot of money, but you could sometimes find them outside of an auction, maybe a little bit less, and whatnot. But don't let this discourage you. I mean, again, it's great for Lincoln owners. It's great for, I think, the future of the sales of these cars. But two things in closing: don't let it discourage you that, hey, if you don't have that kind of money, that you're not going to be able to buy one. And number two, don't don't, if you're thinking about doing a full restoration, don't just dive in and say, hey, I'm going to do a $200 or $300 restoration. You don't always get that money back. And then I think my final comment is this: we do continue to see black Lincolns. A lot of people want a black Lincoln sell for even more than I would sometimes even assume they're going to sell for. And what I mean by that is Mecum just had a 63, I think it was, sold for 175,000 with the buyer commission. It was just south of 200 grand. So you got to keep that in mind. people want certain things, and with this one, I think was a very strong number. Congrats, Larry. Thanks for watching. If you watched all the way through, leave a comment. Certainly appreciate the support. Lincoln Addict podcast, and go to lincolnaddict.com. You can find shirts like what you see here. I do have stickers, and more merchandise will be coming in the future. Stay on the rise, everyone. We out of here. Peace.